Montana Territory. Spring of 1881, snow still clung to the mountains like a last breath, but the valley below was waking up. Liliana Rosewood stepped down from the stagecoach in Dawson's Hollow, with her hands folded tight around the small satchel in her lap. Her dress was plain calico, neatly sewn, the hem dusty from the long ride. She stood tall, shoulders squared, despite the dozen eyes watching her. She knew what they saw: a woman with warm brown skin, dark curls pinned beneath a bonnet, lips pressed into a line. A woman out of place. The town was small, two muddy streets, a feed store, a saloon, and a whitewashed chapel with chipped paint. Nothing like New Orleans, nothing like home. A man in a tan coat and wide hat stepped forward, hat tugged low. "You Liliana Rosewood," she nodded. "I am," he stared. "You were not what I expected," she already knew. "You wrote for a wife," she said calmly. "I wrote back. I gave my name, my picture." "You did," he said slowly, then looked away. "But I cannot marry you," her breath caught. "Because of my skin." He didn't answer, just turned and walked away. The street quieted. The driver tossed down her trunk and climbed back aboard. The coach pulled off in a cloud of dust, and Liliana stood alone beside her suitcase. Afternoon light slanted across her face, and still she did not cry. She only stood there, stiff as iron, until the last wheel creaked out of hearing. A voice came from the edge of the street. "Hard thing being left like that." She turned. A tall man stood near the livery stable, arms crossed, sleeves rolled. He looked about 30, sun-browned, with quiet blue eyes. Dust clung to his boots and the front of his worn shirt. He was lean, strong, and had the kind of stillness in him that made horses trust. A brand marked gelding stood nearby, reins looped loosely. "I did not ask for your pity," she said. He stepped forward, slow and even. "That was not pity." She held his eyes. "Then what was it?" "Respect," he said. "Name's Rowan Zeller." She hesitated. "Liliana Rosewood." Rowan nodded. "You have a place to stay?" "No." Her voice was sharper than she meant, but she was tired of the stares. "I have nowhere. Marshall's wife takes in boarders." He motioned to a house near the chapel. "You can stay there until you figure out what comes next." She looked at the small house. "And what would come next, Mr. Zeller? I have no money to go back east, no husband." "No work." Rowan tilted his head. "You are not the only one in this town who's lost something." Liliana stared at him, her pulse loud in her ears. "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged. "Because you are standing here with your chin up while half this town watches like you are a show." "That takes grit. I respect that." She looked away. "Respect does not put food in my hands." "No," he said. "But it is a start." Rowan picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing and nodded toward the house. "Come on." The marshal's wife was kind, older, with a soft voice and a big kettle that never seemed to empty. Liliana paid her way by doing laundry and helping with supper. She kept to herself. But whispers followed her wherever she went. The woman who came to town by letter and got turned away for the skin she was born with. She saw Rowan most days. He lived on the edge of town, ran cattle with two other men, kept to himself, mostly. But he tipped his hat when he saw her. Once he brought her a sack of flour. Another time he left a stack of books on the porch. She knew it was him because they were about plants and healing, and he had asked once what she used to do before she came west. "I helped my aunt with tinctures and tonics," she had said, "back in Louisiana." "Folk medicine, mostly." "You were a healer," he said. She had not answered. "But yes." One morning, 2 weeks after she arrived, she was carrying a basket of clean shirts through town when she heard shouting near the general store. A boy was crying, no older than 6, with straw-colored hair and a bloody scrape on his cheek. Rowan was crouched beside him, looking grave. "Where's your mama?" Rowan asked. The boy shook his head. "She ran off, took the baby, left me." Liliana stepped closer. "What is your name?" "Harlan," the boy whispered. Something in her chest pulled tight. He looked like a child who had gone too long without someone to hold his hand. Rowan stood. "No one has seen his mother since yesterday morning. She was not right in the head." Liliana knelt before the boy. "Come here, Harlan." He blinked at her, then came into her arms. She held him close. "You are safe now." Rowan watched her quiet. That night, Harlan slept on a cot beside her own. He clung to her hand until he drifted off. A week passed. Then two. Rowan brought them a sack of potatoes, a cast iron kettle, some cloth for Harlan's shirt. He never asked anything in return. One evening, Liliana stepped outside to find Rowan waiting by the fence, hat in hand. "I want to show you something," he said. She glanced back at the window. Harlan was sleeping. "Come on," Rowan said. "It is not far." She followed him past the edge of town, down a dirt path that led to the river. The sky was a wash of gold and violet. Willows bent over the water and the air smelled like pine and earth. He stopped beside a cedar tree. A wooden box sat on a stump. He opened it. Inside was a dress deep green with lace at the collar. Next to it lay a ring, simple silver with a pale stone the color of river ice. Liliana stared. "What is this?" Rowan looked straight at her. "You deserved better than what you got." "That man did not see you, but I do." Her hands trembled. "Rowan, I want to marry you," he said. "Not because I feel sorry for you, because I see the woman you are, strong, kind, brave." Tears welled in her eyes. "You do not care that I am not white. I care that you are Liliana," he said. "That is all." She looked at the ring, then back at him. "And Harlan," Rowan's voice was steady. "He is our boy if you want him to be." Her breath caught. She stepped forward, took his hand, and laid it against her cheek. "Yes," she whispered. Rowan smiled, then slipped the ring onto her finger. The sun dipped low, and the river moved soft below the trees. Liliana leaned into him, heart wide open. She had come west with nothing. But now she had everything. Morning came with a blue haze over the hills and the sound of roosters calling through the valley. Liliana stood by the stove in the marshal's kitchen, sleeves rolled to her elbows, folding dough over itself with slow, practiced movements. The warmth of the fire eased the stiffness in her fingers. Harlan sat at the table behind her, drawing shapes in the steam on his tin cup. "Can we live with Mr. Rowan now?" he asked, voice small but sure. Liliana pressed her thumb into the dough and didn't answer right away. The question had lived in her long before Harlan put it to words. "There's things to settle first," she said gently. "A home takes building." He nodded, as if that made sense. Then he went back to tracing circles, satisfied with her answer for now. Later that day, she walked out to Rowan's land with a basket of bread tucked beneath her shawl. His cabin sat near a stand of pines, smoke curling from the chimney, fence posts lined in straight rows. A piebald mare grazed nearby, stopping to lift her head when Liliana came near. Rowan was splitting cedar along the side of the porch, sleeves pushed up and sawdust in his hair. He looked up and wiped his brow with the back of his arm. "You walked all this way?" he asked. "I needed the quiet," she said, setting the basket down on the porch rail, "and I wanted to see where you live." He stepped back from the block, axe resting by his side. "It's not much." "I didn't ask for grandeur," she said, eyeing the even rows of vegetables starting to sprout in the small garden patch. "It's honest." He watched her for a moment, then motioned toward the door. "Would you like to come in?" The floorboards creaked beneath her boots as she stepped inside. The cabin smelled faintly of pine resin and dried tobacco. A single bed was tucked into the far corner, a table built by hand stood beneath the window, and a row of books lined the shelf above the hearth. Everything was clean, lived in plain. "You built this place yourself?" she asked, brushing her fingers along the edge of the table. "Took me 2 winters," he said. "I never planned to share it." She turned to him. "And now," he folded his arms, voice quiet. "Now I can't picture it without you." Her chest ached, not with sorrow but with the weight of being seen. She stepped closer, her hands brushing the buttons of his shirt. "I want us to marry," she said, "but not right away. I want time for Harlan to settle. For me to begin again on my own feet." Rowan nodded slowly. "You set the pace, I'll walk beside you." Outside, a breeze stirred through the trees, carrying the scent of thawed earth and wild sage. She stayed a while, helping him shell peas at the table, their hands brushing now and again. He didn't rush her, he never did. That evening, back at the marshal's house, she sat on the edge of Harlan's cot and combed through his hair with her fingers. "We'll have our own place soon," she murmured. but we'll do it right. Brick by brick. Will I have my own bed? He asked, eyes heavy with sleep. You'll have a window that looks out on the hills, she said, and a pony to feed, and a place no one can take from us. His breathing steadied, and she sat beside him until the moon rose high. The next morning she took work at the mercantile, sorting invoices and sewing flour sacks into aprons. The shopkeeper, an older man with stiff hands and a quiet wife, didn't ask questions. When she brought Harlan with her, he cleared a space behind the counter where the boy could sit with a slate and chalk. A week passed, then another. Rowan rode in most days, sometimes to bring her lunch, sometimes just to walk her home. He never made a show of it, but folks noticed. The stairs changed shape, not gone, but dulled by time and familiarity. One afternoon, she found a small wooden box tucked inside her work basket. Inside lay a tiny silver pin shaped like a rosebud, delicate and careful. She looked up to find Rowan leaning against the post outside the shop, hands in his pockets. She stepped out to meet him. "You left something in my basket." "I did," he said. "I thought maybe you'd wear it when you felt ready." "I'm not a woman who needs gifts," she said, but her voice caught. "I know," he replied, "but I'm a man who needs to give them." She reached up and fixed the pin at her collar, fingers trembling just so. Then she looked into his eyes. "I'm ready, Rowan." He didn't smile, didn't reach for her hands. He just nodded once, as if a promise had settled quietly between them. That night, she told Harlan they'd be moving to the cabin. He asked if he'd have to wear shoes every day. She said only on Sundays. He grinned like it was the best news he'd ever heard. And so, on a soft morning near the end of May, Liliana packed a small trunk with what little she owned. Rowan hitched the wagon, and Harlan rode beside him holding a string of dried apples. The three of them drove out past the edge of town, toward the stand of pines and the clean, open space where a new life was waiting. Rowan had cleared space in the garden for herbs. Liliana planted them with careful hands, the earth cool beneath her palms. Harlan ran through the tall grass chasing butterflies, his laughter echoing across the field. That evening they shared cornbread and beans on the porch, the three of them quiet in the golden light. It wasn't a grand home, but it was theirs, and it was beginning. By early June, the cottonwood trees near the creek had filled out, their leaves rustling like distant water. Liliana stood in the sun-warmed doorway of the cabin, brushing flour from her hands as Rowan came up from the lower pasture, hat in hand, shirt damp along the collar from fence postwork. He moved with the same steady rhythm he always had, but today there was something different in the set of his jaw. "There's a traveling judge passing through Elk Crossing," he said, resting his hand on the doorframe. "He'll be there through Sunday." Liliana met his gaze. "That's 3 days from now," Rowan nodded. "I figured we'd ride in with Harlan, get the papers signed, say our vows." She wiped her palms on her apron. "You already spoke to the judge." "I did," he said. "Told him I'd be bringing a woman who doesn't care for fuss and a boy who'll fall asleep halfway through." Liliana's lips parted, but no sound came. After a moment she asked, "And who'll stand beside me?" Mrs. Tucson agreed. "She's driving in for supplies and said she'd stay for the ceremony." Liliana turned toward the hearth, heart knocking against her ribs. She hadn't worn the green dress yet, not once. It hung near the bed, covered in muslin, waiting for a day that felt right. Now she smoothed her hands over her apron and looked at Rowan again. "Then I'll sew a ribbon for Harlan's collar," she said, "and I'll wear the dress you gave me." He took a step inside, his boots silent on the plank floor. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she said, voice even. He reached for her hand, not with urgency, but like someone anchoring himself. She let him take it. That afternoon, she sat on the porch with a needle and blue thread, stitching through the linen collar of Harlan's shirt while the boy ran through the tall grass with a stick he claimed was a cavalry sword. Rowan repaired a broken stirrup strap nearby, glancing up now and then, his expression unreadable. At nightfall, Liliana lit a small oil lamp and opened a cedar box beneath the bed. Inside were dried leaves, ground bark, and a bundle of twine. She measured out what she needed, wrapping the mixture in cloth before tucking it above the door lintel. Rowan stepped in just as she was tying the knot. "What's that for?" he asked. "For blessing the house," she said. "It's a Southern rootworker's charm." Not everyone believes in them. He set his hat on the peg, watching her work. "I trust what you believe in." The morning of the wedding, the sky was pale and cloudless. Rowan hitched the wagon early, brushing down the mare until her coat shone. Liliana dressed in silence, fingers trembling only once as she fastened the last button at her wrist. The green fabric fit like it had been made for her alone. Harlan wore the shirt with the blue ribbon stitched just beneath the neck. He climbed into the wagon bed with his slate tucked under one arm and his hair combed into a neat part. The ride to Elk Crossing took most of the morning, the wagon creaking along the narrow road that wound between pine and ash. Liliana kept her eyes on the horizon, her hands folded in her lap. In town, a few curious glances followed them, but no one spoke. The judge was a short man with a gray beard and a voice like gravel. He stood in front of the stone courthouse beneath the shade of a sycamore, papers squared on a crate beside him. "Mrs." Tucson arrived just before noon, cheeks flushed, her gloves dusted from travel. Rowan took Liliana's hands in both of his. He didn't speak vows like a schoolbook. He just looked at her the way he always had, plain, honest, steady. "I give you what I've got," he said. "My name, my land, my days. You don't owe me anything, but I'll spend my life giving what I can." Liliana's voice didn't falter. "I'll walk beside you," she said. "I'll raise this boy with you. I'll keep your fire lit and your bread warm. That's my vow." The judge nodded once and signed the paper. Rowan signed next, then Liliana, her hand firm on the quill. Harlan stood on tiptoe to press his palm beside their names. That night they did not return to the cabin. They stayed in a room above the mercantile, the walls thin and the beds narrow. Harlan nestled into one cot, curled beneath a quilt stitched in faded blues. Liliana sat beside the window, brushing out her hair as the wind shifted outside. Rowan leaned against the door frame, arms folded. "You changed everything," he said. She looked up. "How? You made the house feel like more than wood and nails." She reached for his hand and drew him toward her. "Then come sit with me. Let's be quiet together." He did. They sat in the hush, watching moonlight stretch across the floorboards. No sound but breath and the distant creak of a weather vane. Come morning, they would ride home. But for now, they had the stillness and each other. By late June, the porch boards had warmed through from sun and footfall. The garden rows had thickened with growth beans curling up their stakes, squash leaves broad and reaching. Liliana stood barefoot in the packed dirt, basket looped over one arm, trimming sprigs of horehound and wild mint. She moved slowly, careful not to disturb the bees. From the edge of the trees, Rowan's whistle carried low and steady. Harlan was with him, dragging a sled made of split wood and rope, full of pine cones and kindling. Rowan walked beside him, a new sling over one shoulder made from the same flour sacks Liliana had stitched into aprons weeks before. "Found a coyote den near the ridge," Rowan said as he approached. "Old one, empty now." Liliana brushed her hands off on her skirt. "You didn't go pockin' around inside, did you?" Harlan shook his head. "He told me to stand back." "I'm teaching him to read sign," Rowan added. "Tracks, droppings, broken twigs. He's got a sharp eye." Liliana crouched to inspect the kindling. "He always did pay close attention, even when he pretended not to." Harlan grinned and took off toward the porch. Rowan set the sling down and leaned on the fence rail. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes on the soil. "That empty land to the south, just past the creek, we could build a bigger house there, something with a second room. Harlan's growing fast." She didn't answer right away, brushing dirt from her palms. Then she stood and looked out past the fence where the cottonwoods swayed in the breeze. "I'd want a root cellar," she said, "and a canning shed that doesn't flood come spring." Rowan nodded. "We can start cutting timber once the weather evens out. Not too close to the creek," she added. "That land's soft. You'll lose your foundation before the first freeze." He looked at her, a slow smile building in his eyes. That's why I wanted to ask you. I'm glad you did. That evening, Liliana sat with Harlan at the small kitchen table, teaching him how to fold paper into a kite. The boy's tongue pressed against his lip in concentration, hands clumsy but eager. Rowan sat nearby, carving a handle for the spinning reel. The scent of cedar and lard soap hung in the air. You miss the place you came from? Rowan asked quietly, not looking up from his work. Liliana's hands stilled. I miss the people, not the place. He nodded as if he understood more than he said. My aunt used to keep a jar of pickled peaches on the sill, she added. Said they were for good luck. We never ate them, just let the sun pass through. Rowan glanced toward the window. We could try planting a few trees come fall. Might not fruit for years, but they'll take if we choose the right spot. She reached for his wrist. Let's do it. For the waiting. They stayed that way for a while, her fingers wrapped gently around his, Harlan humming to himself as he drew a kite tail with charcoal on the tabletop. Outside, the last light faded over the ridge. The next morning, a rider came down the road from town, dust clinging to his coat. He brought news of a cholera outbreak in a mining camp northeast, and the doctor from Dawson's Hollow had gone to tend the sick. Rowan met the rider at the gate and returned with the message still fresh on his brow. Mrs. Dawson sent word, he said. She's looking after 2 children whose parents are down with fever. She needs help. Liliana wiped her hands and reached for her shawl. I'll go. I can steep willow bark and make poultices. Rowan touched her arm. You sure? She needs someone who knows what to do, Liliana said. I'll take Harlan. He can gather water and keep the little ones occupied. Rowan gave a slow nod. I'll ride out to the ridge, check the cattle, and be back before dark. At the Dawson home, Liliana moved with calm precision. She boiled cloth, crushed herbs, and rubbed salve onto foreheads damp with sweat. Harlan sat on the floor with a toddler in his lap, humming softly. The sickest of the children, barely older than Harlan himself, clung to a doll missing one arm, eyes glassy but watching Liliana's every movement. That night, with the children asleep and the fever breaking, Liliana stepped outside to find Rowan waiting with the wagon. A small oil lamp burned steady on the seat beside him. Is it safe to come in? He asked. She nodded. They'll pull through. He climbed down and folded his arms. I've never seen you like that, calm in the middle of all that worry. She leaned back against the porch rail. I learned from my aunt. She said you can't chase sickness out with fear. Rowan studied her for a moment. You were meant to be here. I didn't think so once. I did, he said. From the day you stood in the road and didn't flinch. She stepped toward him, her hand finding its place at the center of his chest. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. He rested his forehead against hers. The air between them was warm with breath and cedar. I want to start building, he said. The new house. I want it done before first frost. Liliana looked into his eyes. Then let's begin. By the first week of July, the new house began rising from the south meadow, timber laid with care, each beam joined by Rowan's hand and planed smooth beneath Liliana's. They worked in tandem, Rowan cutting and setting the frame, Liliana mixing clay and straw for plaster, Harlan carrying stones to line the base as instructed. The land held firm where they chose it, high enough above the creek to stay dry, open enough to catch morning light. On the 5th day of building, Rowan returned from the ridge with 2 men from the neighboring ranch brothers, quiet and broad-shouldered, who offered their help in exchange for a sack of flour and a few jars of pickled beans. Liliana fed them well, and they stayed 2 extra days without asking for more. You've got a way of making folks want to stay, Rowan told her as they watched the roof beams go up. Liliana didn't answer right away. She was watching Harlan, crouched in the grass with a piece of chalk, sketching out where the root cellar door would go. These past few months, she said, brushing sawdust from her sleeve, I've come to know what it feels like to belong without needing to prove every inch of it. Rowan stepped beside her, his brow touched by summer sun. You never needed proving, just space to take root. She turned toward him. And now we have both. The next week, she took Harlan into the timberline to gather pine resin and wild garlic. On the way back, they found a patch of ripe gooseberries, and she filled her apron while Harlan filled his mouth. That night, she baked a tart that they ate still warm, the crust flaking under their forks. Rowan worked by lantern light to finish the shutters, and when Liliana stepped out with a bowl of cooled berries, he set his tools down without hesitation. "Do you ever miss being alone?" she asked, offering him the bowl as they sat on the porch step. He shook his head. "I thought I'd always want quiet. Turns out I just didn't know the right kind of noise." Liliana tilted her head. "And what kind would that be?" He looked over at Harlan, who was lying on his stomach, carving his initials into a piece of scrap wood. "Footsteps on the porch," Rowan said. "A kettle whistling. A boy asking 100 questions." Liliana leaned her shoulder against his. "Then I'll keep the kettle full, and Harlan will take care of the rest." The house was finished by late August. 2 rooms, thick walls, a porch with room enough for chairs. The root cellar stayed dry after the first rain, and Liliana lined it with jars of beans and smoked pork, shelves neat and labeled. Rowan built a workbench beneath the south window, where she pressed herbs and dried petals. Harlan's bed sat beneath the eave, a quilt stitched with patches from Liliana's old dress and Rowan's worn shirts. One morning, Rowan brought home a puppy Scrappy, long-legged, with a coat like wheat and ears too big for his head. He set it down in the yard, and Harlan dropped his slate and sprinted to it. "What's his name?" the boy asked, holding the pup to his chest. "That's for you to decide," Rowan said. "He's yours." Liliana stepped out, drying her hands on her apron. "As long as he stays out of my garden," Harlan beamed. "He can sleep by the fire. I'll keep him clean." Rowan looked over at her. "He'll guard the place once he grows," she nodded. "Seems this house already has everything it needs." That evening, after the dishes were washed and Harlan had fallen asleep with the puppy curled at his feet, Liliana stepped onto the porch. Rowan was already there, sharpening a small blade, his shirt sleeves rolled, hair damp from his evening wash. She sat beside him, the night air warm and full of crickets. "I never told you what I prayed for," she said. He glanced over, knife resting against the whetstone. "You prayed?" "Back when I climbed off that coach," she said, "after the man turned me away. I stood alone in the dust and prayed I wouldn't break." Rowan's jaw tightened. "You didn't." "No," she said, laying her hand over his, "because you saw me before I saw myself." He let the blade rest and turned his palm up, fingers closing around hers. "I didn't know what I was waiting for," he said. "But once you walked into town, I knew I'd never want anything else." They sat that way until the stars wheeled overhead, until the lamp inside burned low and the dog thumped softly in its sleep. Fall came in slow turns. The trees along the ridge turned gold, and the air dipped cool enough to bring in the last of the squash. Liliana gathered rose hips and dried them in cloth sacks, while Rowan repaired the barn roof before the frost. Harlan started helping at the livery, brushing down ponies and sweeping the stalls. Each evening he returned with stories about a man who'd come from the Bitterroots, or a horse with eyes the color of smoke. On the first snowfall, Rowan brought Liliana out to the porch. The yard lay white and still, the moonlight turning it silver. He pulled a small box from his coat and opened it in his palm. Inside was a ring not new but finely made, the band etched with tiny leaves. The stone was clear, set low. She'd never seen it before. "It belonged to my mother," he said. "My father gave it to her when they moved west. I'd like you to wear it if you want." Liliana didn't speak. She slid it onto her finger beside the simpler band from their wedding. "I'll wear it every day I draw breath," she said. He kissed her there on the porch, with snow falling around them. They made a life, unremarkable to others, but full in every way that mattered. Seasons turned. Harlan grew. The puppy became a dog that guarded the chickens and slept beside the boy's bed. Liliana's herbs were trusted from one ranch to the next, and Rowan's cattle fetched good prices come summer drives. They laughed more than they spoke sometimes, and when they argued, it never lasted past sundown. One spring morning, Liliana laid Rowan's hand flat against her belly, quiet and steady. He understood without words. They added a cradle to the house and more jars to the cellar and a second quilt to the bed. And when the baby came a girl, strong, lunged, and dark-eyed, they named her after Liliana's aunt, the one who'd first taught her how to heal. Rowan held his daughter in the crook of one arm, his other wrapped around Liliana's waist. "You brought me back to life," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "You showed me what it meant to live." And so they did together always.